A phone buzzes in a quiet London hotel room, and nobody in that room has any idea that in a few days, an entire country is going to stop what it's doing, just to watch one girl hit a tennis ball. That's not an exaggeration. That's exactly what happened. Because the player sitting in that room was Alex Eala. And a few weeks later, families in the Philippines would be setting alarms for 3 in the morning, just to catch her matches live. Rewind for a second. Before any of this, Alex wasn't the name anyone was talking about. When the experts made their Wimbledon predictions, her name barely showed up. The attention went to the bigger names, the established champions, the players with trophy cabinets already full. Alex was just an entry in the bracket. The kind of name casual fans scroll straight past. But here's the thing about names people scroll past. Sometimes it's not because there's nothing there. It's because nobody's looked closely enough yet. Her first win barely made a ripple. A few die-hard fans back home checked the score, nodded, and moved on with their day. Nothing dramatic. Just a quiet result on a Tuesday. Then she won again. And this time, the ripple turned into something people noticed. A screenshot got passed around a family group chat. A comment showed up on a forum. Curiosity started leaking through a crack that hadn't been there before. By her third win, something had genuinely shifted. Because now she wasn't just winning. She was winning in a way that made people lean in. There was a stillness in how she handled pressure. A calm that didn't seem to match someone playing on the biggest stage of her career. Commentators started saying her name more. Analysts started pulling up her numbers mid-broadcast. And somewhere, in a living room that had never cared about tennis before, someone found themselves holding their breath on a single point. That's not normal. That's not how casual interest behaves. Then came the fourth round. Say that slowly, because it carries more weight than it sounds like it should. No Filipino singles player had ever reached that stage at Wimbledon before. Not one. Ever. Which means every point in that match wasn't just a point. It was history, happening in real time, in front of millions of people who hadn't even planned to be watching. Think about what that actually looked like on the ground. A father in Manila waking his son at 2 in the morning. Not for an emergency, just because he didn't want the boy to miss it. An office worker sitting in her parked car on her lunch break, phone propped against the dashboard, refusing to go back inside until the match was over. A group of teenagers crowded around one phone screen in a dorm room, all holding their breath at the same second. None of them knew each other. None of them planned it. And yet they were all connected by the exact same nervous energy. That's the strange thing sport does. It doesn't ask permission before it turns strangers into something close to family. This is not just a tennis story. This is a country finding out what it's capable of, one match at a time. Remember that line. We're coming back to it. Because here's where the story could have gone in a completely different direction. Reaching a milestone like that comes with a weight most people never see. The moment Alex became a headline, she also became a target. Every match after that wasn't just a match anymore. It was an event. And events come with expectations. Expectations that have quietly ended a lot of promising careers before. So the real question wasn't whether Alex could win one big match. The real question was whether she could survive everything that came after it. Interviews multiplied overnight. Cameras that used to ignore her now followed her everywhere. Practice sessions, warm-ups, small gestures that suddenly got picked apart online. For a lot of athletes, that kind of attention becomes suffocating. It changes how they move, how they think, how they play, because suddenly they're not just competing for themselves anymore. But something strange kept happening every time the cameras caught her between points. She didn't look rattled. She didn't look like someone drowning under the pressure. If anything, she looked like someone who'd already decided, long before any of this started, that she wasn't going to let outside noise dictate how she played. Read that last sentence again. Because that composure became its own story. Almost more compelling than the wins themselves. People don't just fall in love with results. They fall in love with how someone carries themselves when everything is on the line. And slowly, without anyone officially announcing it, something bigger than a tennis run started forming. It stopped being about one player's tournament, and started becoming about what that tournament represented. Every kid holding a second-hand racket on a cracked court in the provinces suddenly had a new answer to what's possible. Every parent who once told their child that dreams like this belonged to other countries had to quietly take that sentence back. The story wasn't staying on a grass court in London anymore. It was showing up in homes, in classrooms, on barangay basketball courts that suddenly had a tennis net dragged into the corner for the first time in years. Now here's what most people missed while they were busy celebrating. The tournament wasn't finished handing out pressure. Every match after that milestone carried a different weight. Opponents started studying her more carefully. Analysts picked apart her previous matches, hunting for weaknesses. The surprise factor that carried her through the early rounds was gone. In its place was something much harder to manage: expectation. And expectation is a strange opponent. You can't hit a serve past it. You can't outmaneuver it with footwork. The only way through it is refusing to let it control you. Match by match, that's exactly what kept happening. And with every round, the numbers watching back home kept climbing. A handful of fans checking scores had turned into an entire country rearranging its sleep schedule around one name. Eventually, the run reached its natural conclusion. Every story, no matter how magical, gets to the point where the match ends and the plane ticket home gets booked. But here's the part almost nobody was ready for, because everyone assumed the noise was about to quiet down. Instead, it was about to explode into something completely different. Word started spreading about which flight she'd be on. Not through any official announcement. Not through a press release. Just through the kind of quiet momentum that happens when enough people care about the same thing at the same time. Someone canceled an afternoon shift. Someone convinced their whole family to drive 2 hours. Someone printed a sign the night before, using markers borrowed from their little sister's school supplies. Nobody told them to come. There was no campaign asking people to show up why the day she landed. That airport didn't feel like a scheduled arrival anymore. It felt like the final scene of a movie nobody had finished writing yet. Flags stretched over the barriers. Homemade signs bobbed above the crowd. Some phones had been recording for over an hour before there was anything to record. Let that sink in for a second. These people weren't there because of an ad. They weren't there because of a marketing push. They were there because, somewhere over the past few weeks, without any of them fully realizing it was happening, a stranger's story had quietly become personal to them. Every few minutes, a ripple of excitement would rise through the crowd as someone matching a similar silhouette appeared near the doors, only to deflate seconds later when it turned out to be someone else. Strangers who'd never spoken before started swapping stories about their favorite moment of the tournament, bonding over an obsession neither of them expected to develop a few weeks earlier. Then word rippled through the crowd. The flight had landed. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Flags lifted higher. Phones angled sharper. Security quietly repositioned near the barriers. Even travelers with zero context slowed their pace, pulled in by the sheer size of the anticipation building around them. That's the thing about collective excitement. It's contagious even to people who have no idea what it's about. Then the doors opened. What followed wasn't a polite round of applause. It was a wall of sound. Raw, immediate. The kind that comes from people who've been holding something in for weeks and finally get permission to let it go all at once. Names shouted. Flags waving. Some people just stood frozen, phone raised, unable to process that the moment they'd waited hours for is actually happening in front of them. And in the middle of all that noise, Alex walked forward. Here's where the story could have gone a completely different direction. Athletes who reach sudden fame sometimes let it change them, even in small ways. A little more distance, a little more performance, a little less presence. Instead, something quieter happened. She slowed down. She looked at people. She smiled in a way that didn't look rehearsed for the cameras. She thanked the people closest to the barrier and carried herself with the exact same calm that had carried her through every high-pressure point on that grass court. That detail, small as it seems next to all that noise, ended up mattering more than almost anything else that day. Because performances earn admiration. Character earns something that lasts a lot longer. Within minutes, clips of that arrival were already spreading online, shared by people who couldn't be there in person but refused to let the moment pass without being part of it. Filipinos living abroad, thousands of miles from home, watched those videos and felt something tighten in their chest. Some admitted they'd never followed tennis before that summer. And yet here they were, refreshing highlight clips at odd hours, suddenly invested in a sport they'd ignored their whole lives. But here's where it gets interesting, because the airport wasn't the ending. It was the beginning of a new chapter, with higher stakes than the one that had just closed. Breakthroughs are thrilling, but they're also dangerous, because the moment you prove what you're capable of, the whole world starts expecting you to prove it again. Immediately. Without pause. The celebrations wouldn't last. They never do. Within days, the flowers would wilt, the messages would slow down, and the quiet routine of professional sport would return. The part nobody films. The empty practice courts before sunrise. The repetition, the exhaustion, the discipline that doesn't care whether anyone's watching. Because victories get celebrated in airports. But they get billed in silence. And now, with an entire country paying attention for the first time, every one of those quiet practice sessions carries a different kind of pressure than before. The next challenge waiting on the horizon isn't just another tournament. It's a completely different surface. Hard courts instead of grass. Different footwork. Different timing. Different rhythm entirely. Grass rewards certain instincts. Hard courts punish different weaknesses. So the same question that followed Alex through every stage of Wimbledon comes back now, louder than ever. Can she adapt fast enough to carry a nation's expectations onto a completely different battlefield? Nobody knows yet. And that uncertainty is exactly why people can't look away. Meanwhile, far from any stadium, something else was quietly happening, something that might matter just as much as any scoreline. On cracked public courts across small towns, kids who'd never picked up a racket before were suddenly asking their parents for one. Coaches who used to teach nearly empty classes were turning students away. Families who'd never once considered tennis a realistic path for their children were driving across town looking for lessons. None of that will trend the way an airport video trends. But it might end up being the most important part of this whole story. Because sometimes the real legacy of a breakthrough isn't the trophy. It's the ripple it creates in people who were never in the spotlight to begin with. Somewhere in that crowd of kids now dreaming bigger than they used to, there might be another Alex. Another quiet name buried in a future bracket nobody's paying attention to yet. Waiting for their own version of that fourth round moment. Which brings us back to where we started. That quiet hotel room in London. Before the airport. Before the flags. Before millions of people rearranged their sleep schedules around a name they barely knew a few weeks earlier. This is not just a tennis story. This is a country finding out what it's capable of, one match at a time. The plane has landed again. Except this time it's heading somewhere new. Toward hard courts, tougher competition, a level of scrutiny that didn't exist a few months ago. The cheering has faded. The airport has gone back to its usual noise of rolling suitcases and boarding calls. But the story hasn't closed. It's only turned a page. So here's the question worth arguing about in the comments. Can Alex Eala repeat what she did at Wimbledon? Or does an entire country now have to learn how to handle expectation, the same way she's had to? Drop your prediction below. And if you don't want to miss what happens next, make sure you're subscribed, because this story is far from over.